Good evening and welcome to our premarital on finance. This is such a big subject and is one of the key components to people breaking up. So this one we want to get right. So I had a chat to one of my financial intelligence friends who helps upskill our church, and I asked him for some of his intro and some of his content, and he said he always reads these 10 statements to kind of put the fear of God into people. So they go like this. If you spend more than you make in a year, you are lost. If you don't know you are spending more than you make in a year, you're very lost. If you don't care if you are spending more than you make in a year, you are lost. If you owe more on your car than your car is worth, you are lost. If you don't know how much you owe on your car, you are lost. If paying the minimum on your credit card is a way of life, you are lost. If you think that paying the minimum on your credit card is a good financial plan, you're very lost. If you have no method of tracking where your money goes, you are lost. If you have a financial dream but no plan, you're lost. If you're making financial decisions that you hope your spouse never finds out about or the tax man never finds out about, you are lost. Many of us are lost. In fact, South African credit rating is higher than anywhere else in the world. We are in a kind of consumer debt nightmare. And so getting this right is so important. And I want to start you off, after scaring you with that, on working out who you are. Because in any given relationship, there will be spenders and savers. Lavish or generous, if you're looking for nice words, slightly irresponsible, and hoarders or accumulators, people who refuse to give anything away. I want you to spend a little bit of time and just go on the spectrum. I'm more of a spender or I'm more of a saver. Just spend a couple of minutes working out which one you are in the relationship. The thing about money is it's an emotional deal. The reason I know this is because though we should know on a kind of balance sheet or on statements, we should know where every single cent comes in from and where it goes out to, the truth about most of us is that we don't. We're either too scared to look at it, or we don't care enough to look at it, or when we look at it, we get too much of a fright to actually think about it. And so we kind of emotionally deal with money. Now, I want to dive into a little bit of the psychology on this because it really helps us to shift. So there are 4 main motivators to finance. In fact, to kind of help you before I get into these 4 motivators, because we're going to identify which one you are, I had a chat to one of my friends who was voted top entrepreneur of the year a number of years ago. And he sat in a room with 50 other entrepreneurs who had all been voted from different areas of the country as the top entrepreneurs. And they got to the last 10 and they said to them, what is your motivator? A psychologist came and asked them a bunch of questions. And it turned out that everyone to the T was motivated by a fear of being poor. They'd grown up, every single one had grown up in poor environments and didn't want to go back there. Fear of poverty was the driver. It's emotional. Now, there are 4 motivators, and I'm going to define these, and you may want to write them down so that you can work out which one you are, that drive finances. The first one is power. So each of these have a positive spin and a negative spin. Power is the desire to be in control. So I have a friend who is probably the most generous friend I've got. And when it came to COVID, when COVID hit, he provided sort of packs of all kinds of pills and other nutrients for all 700 of his employees. The reason he did that was because he wanted to take as much control as he possibly could to look after. He wanted to be powerful when it came to all the people he cared about and all the people who worked for him. Power was his driver. In the same way, when he's dealing with a competitor, he will do whatever he needs to squeeze that person out to get the deal. His power is his driver. He can use it for generosity. He can use it for crushing. But power is the motivator. Some people are driven by power. It's the need for being in control and having control over. The second motivator is freedom. I have a motivation of freedom. I want to be free to do the things that God's called me to and the things I love. I don't want to think about money. I look after money, and I'm quite careful with money, not because I want to have great security, but because I want to have great freedom. People who are driven by freedom can use it for positive. I use it to fulfill the call of God in my life, or they can use it for in negative spaces. I'm quite prone to bury my head under the sand so that I don't have to face the consequences of financial decisions. That's what people who have a motivation of freedom are driven by. The third one is generosity. So I married a woman whose financial motivator is generosity. And on the positive side, she is incredible. She will take the shirt off her back for the poor person. She cares deeply about blessing people with gifts and caring for them. And on the negative side of generosity, she'll often spend money that we don't quite have. It's driven by something good, but it can go south. The last one is security. I have an accountant who manages the church's money, and her entire motivation is security. She will be generous when she knows we have enough in the bank to look after our staff and all our bills for the next couple of months. Security is her motivator. The positive side is that when she feels secure, she's incredibly generous. The negative side is that if she's feeling insecure in that space, she will get incredibly tight, and fear will literally come out of all the pores in her body as she pulls the reins in. I want you to spend a few moments and work out, what is your motivator? Is it power? Is it freedom, generosity, or security? Now that you've found what motivates you, because it is an emotional deal, I want to kind of give you a picture of where it can go and then talk about how you shift it as a couple. So I don't know how many of you have ever met a poor Jew, but there aren't a lot of them. They have a different way of thinking about money. In fact, if you study Jews coming into Israel, into America or wherever because they got displaced, so they went all over the world. There's a pattern to what they do wherever they go. So when they came into New York, the first generation were traders of Jews, and they literally scrimped and saved and did absolutely everything they could to make enough money for their kids to be educated. The big driver was education. How do I get my kids educated so that they can take life forward? The kids who grew up were doctors, lawyers, accountants, and educators. And so as you looked at Jews who moved into New York, literally you could see the next generation were all professionals. They then were able to use their skills to help their parents, but they used their skills to generate wealth and educate their kids. The third generation of Jews literally started franchises. They took a little spaza shop and turned it into a spa. They just kept growing things and developing things. And their kids became CEOs. It's a fascinating history to observe. This happened wherever the Jews went. In fact, a lot of the German hatred for them was that they had amassed so much wealth. The question is why? Well, there are a few things. Jews have a different way of thinking about money. In fact, in Jewish thought, there's a proverb that drives a lot of Jewish thinking. It says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. The thinking is, how do I sacrifice for not just my kids, but my children's children? So I have a Jewish friend who, when he finished his degree, was given his first home. He didn't have to pay off his first home. He was given his first home. His starting place in life was generating wealth. It is a Jewish mindset. How do I set my kids up and my children's children to be generating wealth? From there, he didn't have to think about whether how he was going to pay off his kids' education. His starting place was, how do I generate enough wealth that I can buy a home for my grandchildren? It is an incredible mindset. Now, the thing about the Jewish mindset is that it is driven by an identity and purpose. See, most of us fall into traps because we are driven by where I should live, what I should drive, what I should wear. We're driven by where's and what's. Jews are driven by who and why. They understand through a biblical approach that they are the children of God, and that through Abraham they received a blessing. And the blessing was that they would be a blessing to the other nations, and that through them people would come to see God. And one of the great ways in which that would happen would be that they would be blessed. And so people would look at them and say, what drives this blessing in your life? And they would turn to God. Jews have lived that out really effectively. When you think about it, the wealthiest people on the planet are Jews. Most of the richest CEOs, richest businessmen are Jews. When you think about the most generous people on the planet, they're Jews. When you think about education, Jews are at the top of most spaces in education. If you look at the Jewish culture, education is incredibly high in value. When you look at arts and culture, most Hollywood directors are Jews. Most owners of those massive companies are Jewish. The Jews have literally infiltrated the top tiers of all society based on this thinking that my identity and purpose is partly to generate wealth, to look after my people, and that people will look to God because of me. Now, I think most of our culture, we have a very diverse culture, different people from different backgrounds, but most of our culture is shaped by social media and the culture around us. And so we fall into traps. We fall into things like the lifestyle trap. So one of the things that I realized was that my parents had grown up in a very different world to the world I was growing up in. The world they grew up in, they had huge homes, many servants, they had company cars, company expenditure that just is not as realistic for me as it was for them. I therefore find myself having to fight the lifestyle trap of, well, this is just how it should be. Well, I can't afford what they could afford. I live in a different lifestyle. The second trap is that as we look at people's social media, we are constantly exposed to their show lights reel, their best of, their one holiday that they'd planned, and they don't show off their worst day and the flat that they're renting so that they can cover this expense that's really, really small, so the rent's really low. People don't show that stuff off. They just show their winning, not their losing. We're facing all kinds of traps. Now, Jews had a way of avoiding the traps that we keep falling into. They avoid consumerism by a set of principles. The first principle is that they give somewhere between 10 and 20% of their income to God and to the poor. It's just a Jewish way of doing things. They see it from Scripture, from the Old Testament. They believe in tithing, and they believe in giving alms to the poor. And so the first 10 or 20% of a Jew's life is gone already. They kind of see that as the price of rent for living on earth. The second 10% goes to education, to investing in upskilling themselves and their children. The third 10 goes to saving. The fourth 10 goes to investing. And then they live off the rest, which means they're living off somewhere between 50 and 60% of their income, which is not even conceivable in most young people's minds. We can't understand how that could possibly happen unless we were to make enough money to make that happen. They don't think about it like that. They think about the principles as driving their lifestyle instead of their lifestyle or their income driving their principles. They think about the world completely differently. Now, the Bible has a chunk of stuff to say about this. And it says things like this: do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. And here's the critical verse: for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If we're thinking about the Jewish mindset, their treasure, their first 10 always goes to God. That's where their treasure is. Their treasure is the next generation, so education. Their treasure is family and caring for one another, so saving. Their treasure is how to generate wealth for future generations, investment. They're storing up money. They're putting their money where their treasure is. The question I want to ask you to have a conversation with your future spouse is, the question I want you to just talk through is, where are we storing up our treasure? Where is our treasure going? Where are we spending our money, basically? Because how you spend your money will determine what you treasure. So why don't you just take a few moments and talk about where your money is going and how it's getting there. Okay. Now that you kind of know where your money is going, or know that you don't know where your money is going, I want to shift this. Remember I said that Jews understood who they were and why they were here, or who and whose they were. And money should be a purpose discussion. How you spend your money should be completely linked to who God's called you to be and what He's put you on the planet to do. That's how you should be thinking through your money and your lens on it. It shouldn't be driven by culture. It shouldn't be driven by kind of what everybody else is doing, because if it's driven by those things, your mind will constantly be going to, what job shall I be doing? Where shall we live? It's always a what and a where. What should we drive? What shall I do for this holiday? Where shall we go? It's always going to be in that space. But if your mindset is on who and whose, you will start to find that you can become the master of your money. You know, Jesus says this. He says, no one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The thought is this: money makes a lousy master and a phenomenal servant. You want to command your money and not to be enslaved to your money. Here's how you know that you are commanding your money. You're obeying the budget. Here's how you know you are enslaved to money. You are obeying the bank. When you are enslaved to money, another word for that is in debt. When you are a master of money, another word for that is well invested. And so people today, and there's an old saying, that there are two types of people who understand compound interest and use it, and people who don't. People today who are free understand the concept of compound interest and use it for themselves, not against themselves. Against would be living in debt and having the bank command them. For would be in control of your budget and using savings to generate compound interest for yourself. So, especially in this economy, the question that I need to ask you is, are you commanding money, or is money commanding you? there is good news on the end of this, but just kind of have that conversation around how's the debt level going? How's the saving going? Is money commanding you or are you commanding money? All right, the last part of this conversation. The good news is that you can, because where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You can use money to shape and direct where your treasure is. I know this because every now and again, I will give money to a certain person. And when I give, in my mind, I'm investing. Not because I want to get a return, but I'm investing because I want to see the return in their lives. If I see me giving to a poor person or giving to someone who's starting a business or giving to someone who is in trouble but can get out of it, when I give, I'm looking at that as an investment. I think that's how God looks at it. You can use your money to direct your heart. And what you'll find is when you give to a poor person as an investment, you'll be interested in their progress. And what will begin to happen is that you are now caring about that poor person because you invested in him. This happens with church. This happens in every aspect of your life. If you want your heart to be in education, then invest in it. Put your money where your heart is. Your money needs to go where your mouth is the common saying that we have. But if you're going to redirect it in this season of your life, as you start to get engaged and married, you're going to have to do it together. And so Jesus makes a statement. He's actually quoting Genesis. He says, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." That word, one flesh, has more connotation than just physical intimacy. He's talking about two people spiritually becoming one knitted unit. I consistently have conversations with people who get into money troubles. And a lot of the reason they get into money troubles is because they try to do one flesh marriage with two bank accounts. And when you talk to them about the reasons for doing that, there are certain reasons. People who have small businesses, entrepreneurs, often have a separate bank account. That makes sense. But what I'm talking about is your personal spending, one bank account deal. Most of the reason people don't want one bank account is control issues. They feel like they want to have control over their income. The problem with that is it results in power issues. Because if you're earning more than your spouse, how are you going to kind of work through the issue of this is where my money goes and this is where your money goes? When you become one flesh, you become one flesh in income too, and expenditure. And so the way to navigate this is to put both income into one bank account, into one budget, and manage it as though all the money is your money together. Anything else generally lands in a power struggle. And so I said to people, dig down, right down to the depths of why you want to keep two bank accounts. If you've got to the real heart of the issue and you're not just skirting around, oh, it's because I like to pay for this and she likes to pay for that, that's not the reason. When you get right to the reason, to the core belief, then ask yourself this question. Is this a one flesh decision or is this a power-driven decision? And if it's a power-driven decision, I think it's going to land you in pain. So what I say to people is don't have a single cent that your spouse spent or earned that your spouse doesn't know about. If you have an investment that you brought into the marriage, tell her about it. If there's money that you found under the pillow, tell her about it. Make sure that you both know exactly what you're bringing into the marriage. And if you're bringing a ton of debt into the marriage, make sure she knows about it or he knows about it. It is completely unfair to come into a marriage without declaring everything that you're bringing in. As we wrap this up, here's a beautiful picture. A beautiful picture is that you, in 20 years' time, know who you are and whose you are and what God's called you to do with your life. And you've directed your finances to the things that you believe He's called you to invest in. And you're waking up one day after sacrificing like many Jews have for many generations. And you're going, man, I have stored up wealth for my children's children because of the sacrifices we've made. And I am in control of my finances. Finances are not in control of me. This would be the biblical plan. And as you go from this, you may need to sign up for our financial intelligence course. It may help you. But regardless, I would ask that you have a conversation about putting all the cash into one kitty and how you're going to go about doing that. And may God bless you and use you to give away more than you'd ever imagined. And may He generate wealth inside of you that flows out of you. May God bless you.